Welcome to the Fancy A BREW podcast. I'm Andy the Northern Diver. In this series I'll be discussing adventure, conservation and progression in scuba diving with some really interesting and inspirational divers that you might or not have heard of. The podcast is supported by Northern Diver International and you the listener through Patreon. So grab yourself a brew and enjoy this week's episode. Right then, so Chris Lemons, welcome to Fancy a Brew podcast, mate. Have you got yourself a brew or are you just drinking water or is it gin?
I didn't pick up on it. That's stupid of me. I've got a glass of water. I'm sorry. Yeah.
Oh, mate. Well,
I'll call for one.
I have recorded a few where earlier on in the year, I'd recorded like 4 or 5 in the day. So they can take an hour and a half, 2 hours sometimes. So imagine the 5th one in, I'm 10 hours deep here. Yeah. There's only so many cups of tea you can drink before your mouth just tastes like you've been chewing on someone's socks.
Yeah, headaches coming on, I can imagine, yeah.
Yeah, so I'm either on a beer or on like some water or something, so I don't blame you, to be fair. So do you want to give us a bit of an insight without too many spoilers, although this is going to be a spoiler in itself, to why we're having a chat and who you are and whatnot, and then we'll see where it goes.
Yeah, sure. My name's Chris Lemons, and I'm my day job and my only job really is I'm a saturation diver. So that's basically for want of a better word, a deep sea diver, isn't it?
Yeah.
But that simply means working in a place where we dive. I work principally in the North Sea at the moment, and that means diving down to depths of, perhaps up to 150, 160, maybe even 200 meters at the very deepest points in the North Sea. And obviously, if you were to dive breathing air, like a sort of standard sort of scuba diver, there's a lot of restrictions to that in terms of the problems with nitrogen narcosis, obviously beyond about 33 meters, and oxygen toxicity for the same reasons, below about 30 meters. But the biggest problem you have is decompression time. So as a scuba diver, obviously you would make stops on the way up to sort of get rid of the residual penalties of the inert gases in your body, the nitrogen in the air normally. Yeah. But if you're to dive to 150 meters and spend 6 hours at a time, which is how long we're on the bottom for working, then those same decompression sort of requirements amount to something like 5 or 6 days. So obviously that can't be done on a daily basis, thank goodness, because firstly, human beings aren't going to be very happy hanging on the end of a rope for 6 days. They're going to get hungry eventually, aren't they? But in a commercial sense, the vessel I work on costs something like 150, 200,000 pounds a day to hire. So oil company clients are not going to put up with people hanging on ropes while there's no work getting done at that price. So saturation diving is basically the solution to all of those problems in a way. In that what it comprises is living within decompression chambers. So on the ship I work on, we've got a series of chambers, and on day one you they open the door and a team of 3 climb in, and you close the door behind you and you're compressed down to basically an equivalent working depth. So let's say we're going to be working at 100 meters, we would normally compress down to about 90 meters, something like that. That might take an hour or 2 of just gently pressing us down to that depth. And then essentially that's it. You're locked into that system, and every day where a diving bell locks onto the top of the chambers, as a team of 3, you climb up, you shut the door. The gas is sort of sucked away from underneath you so that you're separated from the system, and the bell is picked up, trolleyed across and dropped down through a moon pool, which is just a hole in the bottom of the ship basically, and lowered down on a wire to that equivalent working depth. So in this example, to 90 meters. And then when you get to 90 meters and you open, we've got a sort of bottom door on our bell, and you open the bottom door, because you've got an equivalence of pressure inside and out, the water doesn't come in. So you've got a dry environment at that depth to work from basically, and you then stick we wear sort of Kirby Morgan 20 kilo helmets on and bailout bottles, sort of standard scuba tanks on your back. We connect an umbilical. All our gas is fed to us through an umbilical, which I'll maybe tell you a bit more about in a minute, but you would put that on, and then you climb down out of the bell and you drop the last 10 meters down to the seabed, work for 6 hours, and then after 6 hours come back to the diving bell, close the door, and you're then hoisted back up to the system, to the ship, and then back onto the system, and you climb back down and basically have a cup of tea and read a book and watch a bit of a film if you're lucky, and then go to sleep and repeat the next day. And what you're essentially doing is one very long dive, because at no point during any of that are you ever decompressing, and not to any significant degree, only the sort of the last 10 meters, if you like. So that's repeated day after day after day. And in the North Sea, we're limited to a maximum of 28 days living in those chambers. So normally after, say, 23 or 24 days, you would stop diving, and you remain within the chambers on the ship and decompress very, very slowly. So the gas is let out very, very slowly over the period of 4 or 5 days for a very safe and protected decompression. And that's it. So it's just one dive. It's just a very convoluted and very expensive way of doing a dive, if you like. And we also, just on the only other thing we do to avoid the problems with nitrogen narcosis and the oxygen toxicity is to mess with the gases, obviously, like any good trimix diver would. So we breathe heliox, a heliox mix. So the helium obviously replaces the nitrogen as the inert gas in the mix, and gives you that stupid silly voice, but it's also doesn't have any kind of narcotic effect on the body at depth or under pressure. So it's quite light, quite easy to breathe. It's good stuff, really. And then we just simply reduce the oxygen content in the mix according to the depth we're going to be working at.
That must be flipping expensive, that, because even trimix open circuits are horrendous, isn't it? So I think you recycle almost everything?
Yeah, you do your very best to. So everything in the living chambers, the heliox is regenerated, recycled, just like a big rebreather, basically. And then same on the bottom, we have a dual valve on our helmet, which then sucks the gas back up the umbilical to the ship. So I think they can manage to reclaim something like 85% of it, something like that is the usage. So it's pretty effective. But still, that's one of the big costs of it. Obviously, it's a pretty finite resource in the world these days, helium. So
Just an example of that depth. I remember I must have been about 16, 17, maybe 18, doing my apprenticeship, and I remember that submarine, the Russian one, the Kursk, had sank, and that was sat at about 100 meters or something. And I remember thinking, 100 meters ain't that far. Why don't they just pop the lid and give it billio up to the surface? That'll be fine. But then, obviously, not being a diver, not understanding the various intricacies of pressures in gas and water and depth, and there's no chances there. You just couldn't.
Yeah, it is. It's something that gets ingrained to you when you sort of work at that depth. The surface just isn't an option. As you say, it's all down to time, isn't it? So, theoretically, you get 100 meters, stay there for 10 seconds and potentially you could come back to the surface. But when you're down there for any kind of duration, your tissues are, that's the name, are entirely saturated with inert gases. So, any kind of bolt to the surface is a pretty quick death from explosive decompression and gas embolisms and all sorts of nasty stuff.
Do you get any kind of ambient light down there at all? Is it completely black?
Very little. It depends on the visibility, but rarely, to be honest. Once you get beyond about 60, I think it's quite rare you see anything. You might just be able to take night from day sometimes, but certainly beyond the 100, there's nothing.
Really? Because we were diving up in the lakes at the weekend, as in the Lake District, and Ullswater from about 5 meters, probably even less than that, is just like being in a pint of Guinness. And I don't know, I like night diving because there is an ambience of light coming in. We're still talking open circuit or even closed circuit now to 40 meters. There's some light coming in, but in there, because you've got all this peat that's washing into the water from the sort of uplands or whatever. It's just blocking everything, and it's different to me. I know there's no sharks or crocodiles that's going to come and get me, but does that ever, at the back of your mind, are you ever thinking, I wonder if something's going to nudge me and then go, fucking hell, what was that?
Yeah, it's definitely, it's disconcerting. I don't even, I don't care what anybody says, nobody finds that a comfortable place to be when it's completely black and disorientating. And North Sea don't worry too much, but you go and work in the rest of the world. I've worked out in the Nile Delta and off Brazil and off west coast of Africa and stuff does bump into you in the dark, and it is pretty unnerving, if you like, but it's just something you get used to. I generally find that because we're not down there for pleasure, I suppose, we're down there doing the job, and you tend to get so focused on what you're doing that you almost forget you're diving, which sounds a bit strange, but particularly that reclaim system as well, that sucks all the gas, so we're not breathing bubbles out into the water, so it's very quiet, quite like peaceful that. In some ways, it's not you get so focused in on it. But it's one of the biggest skills of the job, I think, is anybody at the end of the day can stick a hat on and breathe underwater, but that ability to first and foremost just be comfortable in that in that environment when you can't see much, or when visibility is very low. And often we're working in drill mud and stuff, and it doesn't take much to be able to see nothing at all. And you'll often see pretty hardened divers go into sat diving and first day out on a black water job, and they, you can just tell they're really struggling, their heads up, and they're not in a happy place. So yeah. But beyond that, there's a lot of, there's a skill to the job in being able to navigate in that sort of environment and actually be productive, because unfortunately we're down there to actually get something done. So if you're not capable of that, it's no, it can be a short career.
What's the, you've got to do that 10-meter drop from the bell to the deck. Is it quite firm, that deck? Because certainly in Ullswater the other week, I just put my hand down for a second just to, I don't know, gather my thoughts or flap around with something. I can't remember what it was. And there's about 3 feet of just sediment. And that for me is disconcerting. I know, again, there's not going to be anything that's going to grab my hand and pull me in, but I don't like that. I want to touch rock and something firm.
Yeah. I mean, it's the North Sea's pretty good mostly. It depends where you are. Certainly if you're up north, it's pretty firm, sandy seabeds and rocky. But down south in the, we're working in the Wash at the moment, doing a lot of decommissioning work, taking oil fields apart basically. That can often be, because it's so tidal, that can be a lot muddier, and 3 feet's pretty rare. But we worked out in Trinidad a few years ago, and lads were dropping down and they were coming into waist deep mud, and it's not so much being disconcerting, but it's an absolute pain for everything you've got to do, because everything is in the mud. Your pipe, you're trying to change a section of pipeline. Well, the original's in the mud, so it's got to be dug out, pulled out. You can't see anything. It's just this horrible. Yeah. So you're quite right.
Is that quite dangerous when you get back in the bell? Then the mud that could be on your boots? Because the reason I ask is I wouldn't have thought it was, but I interviewed someone earlier on in this series from Allcock. They do all the monitors and stuff. And she was saying that they'd had a problem with the hydrocarbon monitors, or hydrocarbons off gassing as soon as you get in the bell. So people were like passing out in bells and stuff because there was gases coming off the mud you perhaps have on your boots and stuff. Is that anything you've encountered?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a common issue. I mean, we all wear, so on top of all our sort of diving gear, we generally these days we put a sort of yellow, certainly when we're working on the seabed, a big yellow, almost like a painter's overalls, we cut the hood off them, but it's with sealed wrists, and that's for that exact reason. So when we get back to the bell, we peel those off, and hopefully most of the mud comes off with it. So for working in drill mud, yes, you do need to be conscious of it, because it's a closed environment, and you take that back into the bell. And absolutely it becomes toxic. And we carry, we'll have an Allcock in our bell, and Allcock meter, and that's repeated up on the surface in dive control as well. So cool. Yes, you definitely got to be conscious of that. Anything comes in, any gas that's bubbling away on the seabed can be a serious problem. If you've got a leak in a pipeline, even air coming in, if you release air on the seabed, and that somehow bubbles its way back into the diving bell environment, then you've got a problem. So we constantly have to be aware of the breathing environment at all times. It's probably the most important thing in everything we do, really, is monitoring the gases.
How sort of cold is it at them depths, and do you feel it?
Well, so it's probably about maybe 3 or 4 degrees right on the bottom, I would say, the North Sea. But we wear hot water suits, which, if you've never had the luxury of doing it, don't ever do it, because you'll never ever want to go back. It's just it's transformational experience, really. But they're not sophisticated. They're like a pretty loose fitting wetsuit, cheap, right. Where they're old, and within them they've got this sort of infrastructure of hoses, almost like garden hoses you use to irrigate your garden when you're away, with little holes in. And seeps up on the ship. Seawater is pulled up from the sea, obviously, heated in a hot water machine, and then pumped back down your umbilical, or the bell umbilical, and out to the diver. So you get this hot water pumped through your suit the whole time you're down there, and it's like being in a warm jacuzzi, really. So being hot is actually the main problem. You're often having to dump it. But if you ever have the misfortune to lose your hot water, or you've got a little valve, you can turn it off just to experiment if you want. It gets cold very, very quickly.
Well, it's not so much my body and core temperature. I find diving in the winter in the UK with a dry suit on, it's my hands and being dexterous, which is an issue, because I'm using a camera most of the time. I find that even dry gloves are not as good a help as perhaps just diving in the summer. So I should imagine you needing to be dexterous, undoing bolts and moving pipework, and that's going to be a massive issue in it. So if you've got that hot water constantly flowing through, it must be a massive benefit then.
It is. I mean, you're exactly right. The gloves is a small but good example. That I just wear literally a pair of practically a pair of marigolds. The thinnest things I can put on, really, as long as I can put hot water hose into them and keep them warm. Then it's great because you need your, you can be dealing with little nuts and bolts. So it's
when you nick one though, and you just got a little spurt coming out of there. Oh, that's horrendous, and it's like you've trapped your hand in a car door.
Exactly. Yeah.
So my first introduction to you was you were sort of like self-shooting, whether you're using a GoPro or your phone or whatever, just sending videos back home, weren't you, for your missus?
Right. Well, I'll clear you up on that one straight away because that's not entirely true.
Okay.
I don't know if the filmmakers about that. It's a long time ago now, but yeah. So when they made this film, they decided they wanted to keep my, as you say, it's a bit of a spoiler, but I do sort of make it through what we're about to describe, obviously. But they decided to hold me back in the film, but they needed a way for the audience to sort of get to know me before I supposedly die. So I did occasionally used to send a little video back, but it wasn't a regular thing. So a lot of those are faked. I'm sorry to say, Andy. Yeah.
Oh, devastating.
But I know it's heartbreaking, but that sort of thing. We did do a little bit of that. So I think maybe one of them in the film's real, but most of them were recreated after the fact.
All right. Right. So 18th of September 2012. It seems a long time ago, that, doesn't it?
Yeah, it is quite a long time ago, really. I mean, it's I mean, a lot's happened since, that's for sure. But it's still fresh in the mind. There's no doubt about that. How did
BBC find out about it? It was BBC that did it, Scotland, wasn't it? BBC Scotland.
It was a combined sort of joint venture between BBC Scotland and Netflix. Yeah, they're the two that put the money into it. But what happened back in 2012 in September, and subsequently the company I worked for decided to make like an in-house documentary or in-house film. That's a 45-minute thing called Lifeline, which is very good as well. It's not that dissimilar to Last Breath, just a much smaller budget and so on, but it's got talking heads and things like that, and and explains it quite well. So the guy who made that, who was commissioned to make that by the company, who I just happened to have met in a pub one night and told him the story, and it was him, and he went and suggested it to the company in the end. But his name was Richard DaCosta, and he then showed it to a friend of his, Alex Parkinson, who was a sort of filmmaker for does a lot of stuff for Discovery Channel and that kind of thing. And the two of them just thought it would make a decent full-length documentary, really. So one spawned from the other, and they went to look for funding through a production company, and the BBC and Netflix got involved. Yeah.
Was that the initial one? Was it Lifeline? Was that as almost like not a toolbox talk, but a kind of thing that would be shown within that company to say, this is what's happened, this is how we can deal with it, this is how you should have done things, how you shouldn't do things, or that kind of
it was
training
exactly right,
aid.
It wasn't sort of meant for sort of the general population. It was something we used to put out to the clients mostly, actually. So we used to occasionally go along and show it to clients and talk to them, or they would do it. And absolutely, and then go around the other boats and serve as a sort of a teaching tool, if you like.
Did the story never hit the papers?
It did. It was in fact, it hit the papers before quite a few people knew about it who should have known about it first, because we as I talked about that decompression, so that sort of that 4 or 5 days decompression, that you can't circumnavigate that. If your mother dies, or if your appendix bursts or whatever, you've still got to do that, same as in any diving, basically. But so after the accident, we still had to decompress, so we had about 4-day decompression or something. We were at 91 meters that night, and in my wisdom, I think it was strange, really. I don't think I'd really appreciate the gravity perhaps of what had happened at the time, and I naively thought, I'm just not going to tell I was engaged at the time, so this was my fiance. I thought, well, I'm just not going to tell her, because what's the sense in worrying her? It's a sort of hard enough for people to watch you go and do that anyway, and to then have to sort of tell them about that and then wave goodbye to them the next time. So I thought, I just won't tell her. And then about maybe 2 days into the decompression, my boss sort of comes onto the comms box in the chamber and buzzes it and says, you might want to consider telling her, because it's going in the papers tomorrow morning. So I think the Daily Record, which is like if you don't know it, is a sort of a equivalent of the Daily Star, I suppose, down in England, up in Scotland, got it first. And like the Topaz is like 110 meters long. It's a big, shiny, pretty looking boat, And instead of like simply Googling Bibby Topaz, it was at the time, where you would find like 1,000 photos of it. They put a photo of a blue and white fishing boat, and then a little article next to it, which is complete rubbish. The classic sort of tabloid journalism. Not an ounce of research done. It's brilliant. So yeah, then it leaked onto there, and then the Times. My mother, who was a teacher at the time, she found out about it reading the newspaper in her staff room, like a double-page spread in the Times. So yeah, it made most of the papers at the time, and then again at the time of the film. But yeah.
I'm ashamed to say, I don't read the papers full stop. I just don't.
You're right not to, yeah.
National Geographic's just got dropped off, mate, about 5 minutes ago. I've still got 3 on my desk here that I haven't read yet. I just don't get any time for reading. Nightmare. No. But I'm ashamed to say I didn't know about the story till we were just flicking through Netflix a year or so ago, perhaps, of trying to find any scuba-related films, and that came up. Didn't know the story, and I guess much like anybody else that watched it, and even when we watched it again last week after me and you had arranged this, and I watched it again to do more research and get some pretty specific notes on it, I was still like, wow, gobsmacked throughout it, and how was it for you to watch it back?
Sorry.
How was it for you to watch it back?
Yeah, same as you, really. It's not, I've seen it quite a lot of times, I suppose, but it's, I feel almost sort of detached from it, like you're watching a third party, and I wonder if he's going to make it as well in a strange way. It's it's a bit eerie. It's obviously eerie, and sobering, and especially when you watch it with other people. We sort of, when it first came out, we were lucky. We got taken to a few sort of premieres, if you want to call them those. But I snuck into the back of a couple of cinemas with friends or my sister and things like that, and sat at the back and. To experience other people watching it and going.
It's when your sister says, "Do you reckon he'll make it?"
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Well, funny enough, there was a period when they were showing it on aeroplanes. I think British Airways was showing it, and a couple of others. And I was just dying to be on an aeroplane when somebody was, watching it, and just to sort of, hello, give it as he makes it.
Boom.
That's right. But yeah, it's a strange. Obviously, it's a strange sensation watching yourself on a screen, whatever the sort of the story. But yeah, particularly in this case, it's bizarre.
Yeah. Do you want to give us a rundown of the story then? Because obviously we talked about it as though everyone who's listening to this podcast has watched the film Last Breath. But there might be an element of people who've never heard of it, don't know of it, or I certainly haven't watched it, other than the fact that we've ruined it because you're still here. Yeah,
it's hard to avoid that. Sorry, yeah. Well, so as you said, it was back in September 2012, and we were diving in a place called the Huntingdon Manifold, which is about 90 miles east of Aberdeen or something like that, which is basically, pretty much in the middle of the North Sea. Most of the oil fields in the North Sea run in a spine, sort of halfway between the UK and, Denmark and Norway. Yeah. So, just about as far from land as you can get in the North Sea anyway. But we were diving inside this manifold, which is a structure that's about 10 meters high and 25 meters long. There's some sort of big house size. Inside of which there are several oil wells, and we were doing a little task, and there were 2 of us in the water. And there always are just 2 of us in the water every day. One always stays in the bell. So on that night, it was a guy called Duncan Allcock, who lives not far from you guys. He's down in Chesterfield, and then there's myself and my colleague Dave Yuasa in the water. And we were just taking off. We were doing a bit of pressure testing and taking off a section, or in preparation for taking off a section of pipe work. So. Very much a normal day at the office, I suppose, as much as it ever can be in that sort of environment. The visibility was pretty good. The structure was quite wide and open, which they often aren't. So your mantra in diving, as we'll come to in a second, is umbilical management, because that umbilical is literally what it sounds like. It provides you with your gas to breathe, what is essentially an infinite supply, and then your hot water to keep your suit warm there that we discussed, electrics for your sort of camera and hat light. And then the reclaim hose as well. So you know that you need to keep that safe at all times. So every second of every day that you're diving, you're making sure that's sort of well rooted. And that night it was, where the bell was sort of within, we could see it basically from the work site, which was unusual. So yeah, normal day at the office, and then that was until we heard the alarms. We have a sort of an open line of communication with a dive controller on the boat. So that's a guy who basically steers us around the job and controls all our gases and makes sure we're doing as we're told.
So you don't have to have a push to talk. It's like an open mic as such. It'll just keep like we're transmitting now. I'm not pressing anything to talk. You can just crack on and just chat.
Absolutely right. Yeah, open circuit basically. Yeah. Open line. So we can hear everything going on in the background, and in the background we heard an alarm. And to cut a very long story short, really, the boat uses what's called a dynamic positioning system to stay in one place. So in order to facilitate two divers working on the seabed, the boat needs to stay on station. Basically, we don't drop anchors or anything like that because it's too deep and we move around too much and there's too much stuff to damage. So it has a computer on board which uses a series of references. So it uses a GPS, so satellite systems, a couple of beacons on the seabed which ping back to a transponder or transducer on the bottom of the boat, and then we have two taut wires which are basically weighted lines which go down to the seabed, and as the boat moves around, their sort of angle of inclination, that information is fed back to the computer. So it uses all those references to basically get the measure of what the tide and the wind and the waves are doing to the boat, and it then instructs. We have various thrusters, so propellers all around the ship to counteract those. And it's a remarkable system, when it works. It can hold the boat in one place to within maybe a meter or two of a single geographical location in all but the very worst of weather. So it's a fantastic thing. Exists on boats all around the world, and it's essential to what we do. But what they had that night, and what the alarm signified, was they'd had basically a catastrophic single point failure of that system. So it's a system that has a backup and a backup to the backup, and all three had gone down, and they had a complete power outage on the bridge. All their screens were black. It was 10 o'clock at night in September, so there was nothing. There's no light from outside. We weren't anywhere near an oil rig or anything like that. It was open water, so they had absolutely no frame of reference, and the ship had very quickly become I think Craig in the film describes it as a sailboat, and that's very accurate. It was completely at the mercy of the wind and the waves, really, at that point. Now we are attached, so the diving bell is attached to the boat by a wire and an umbilical, and we are attached to that diving bell by an umbilical. So when the ship starts to move, we need to go with it, otherwise we're going to have a problem. So as soon as that alarm goes off, which just doesn't happen, we've never had a red light on our boat. I don't know anyone else who ever has. Red light signifying a complete failure of that system. That said, for Dave and I don't think we really knew what was going on, but our dive supervisor that night was a guy called Craig Frederick, and he told us in no uncertain terms to basically get ourselves out of the structure and back to the diving bell, which sits, as we discussed, maybe 10 meters above the seabed. So we didn't think too much of it. We sort of put our tools down and made a fairly calm and orderly exit from the structure, dropped back down to the seabed, fully expecting to see the diving bell in front of us, but it wasn't. We noticed our umbilicals were wrapped back over our heads and back over the top of this structure we'd been working within. So as we said, there's only one safe haven in sat diving, that is the bell. So the easiest way to get there is to follow your umbilical. So we turned and we both started to climb these umbilicals, constantly being nudged to do so by Craig. And when I get to the top of the structure, 10 meters up, say, I've obviously left a loop of umbilical behind me. So I turned just to clear it or to make sure it doesn't snag on anything. But ultimately it was too late, and it had already caught on this transponder bucket, just a metal outcrop basically on the side of the structure, and caught, sort of looped under a very tight small gap, and was tightening quickly. So I sort of plunged to try and free it, but realized extremely quickly that I wasn't going to be able to do so, and I at that point effectively become an anchor on the end of 8,000 tons of ship, and there's only really going to ever be one winner in that situation.
Wow. Fun and games, mate.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So Dave, who was in the water with me, he's because our umbilicals are restricted to 50 meters. So he sort of spotted there was a problem, and he turned and tried to get back to me to help me, but I think already at that point, the ship was already, over 50 meters away. So he was only able to get to within a couple of meters of me. And we had this sort of cinematic moment where we're sort of looking into each other's faces, and I'm sort of imploring him to come and give me a hand, and he's basically saying, I can't, I'll see you later. And he sort of got pulled away into the darkness, and his light disappeared, and I was left on my own, which was, quite a lonely feeling all of a sudden. But I was busy thrashing away, trying to free it. I remember I was being sucked very slowly into the structure as the umbilical was sort of edging its way around. And my first thought was my legs were going to break, if they were being splayed across this structure. And I thought, this is going this is going to hurt. And then my second worry was that the umbilical kept sort of moving around this very small gap, and I thought, well, I'm going to get pulled down there through it, like being pulled through a cheese grater or something, and that wasn't going to be a very pleasant ending either. So, I mean, the umbilical, I couldn't really hear it, but Dave, as he's been pulled away by the boat, he could hear the umbilical creaking and straining, and eventually it strained to the point where internally, I think the what we call the communications cable, but the electric cable, basically, I think I must have snapped internally, or certainly got pulled to the point of no return. And it was like a jack being pulled out of a speaker, and I lost communications back to the ship and the bell. So suddenly I was on my own, if you like. And then literally, a few seconds later, the gas hose, I think, must have got kinked to the point of no return, and I lost a supply of gas, which is disconcerting at the best of times. I'm sure you've perhaps experienced that at some point. And most divers, even if it's just in training, will practice something like that. So it's not nice, is it? But you're used to it, and it's something you practice for. So we carry as a backup a sort of bailout bottle. So I had a twin set. I think it's 2 7-litre bottles on my back that night. And they supply a feed to your helmet. So you sort of open a knob on the side of your hat to give yourself some gas again, which is always a good feeling. But as soon as that happens, then I've gone from a world of basically an infinite supply of gas and light and everything else to very much being on a clock, because at 91 meters, which is where we were that night, that's a very finite supply. The film makes a big deal of 5 minutes, but I think it was my bailout was at 280 bar, 2 7-litre tanks. So if you do the maths, based, I don't know, IMCA 40 litres a minute breathing rate or something, it works out at 9 minutes, so actually it's probably a more realistic.
When he said that, it's one of the notes that I wrote down, and I assumed wrongly that you had twin 12s on your back at 210 bar. So I was like trying to do the maths, going 5 minutes, where have they got them from? But obviously it stands to reason. If you got twin 7s and they were blown up a little bit higher, the maths still doesn't compute. But it was interesting to think, flipping out. Even so though, the amount of time you would have on twin 12s at 210 still isn't enough.
No, it's not a lot
to be left for 40 odd minutes. No,
there's no circumstance when you got a lot of time really. But I think 280 bar at 91 meters. Depends what breathing rate you use. The IMCA rate, which is probably one of the lower ones, 40 litres a minute. The Norwegians use 62.5 or something, don't they? So it's works out to about 9 minutes anyway. So a bit of poetic license in the film, but nevertheless not much time. And so still I'm still attached by an umbilical then, and it sort of continues to strain and creak, and then eventually, like a shotgun going off, it snaps and breaks. And for me, the sort of tension is released, and I fell backwards from the top of the structure onto my back on the seabed, sort of 10 meters below, and into the most complete and utter darkness. Disorientating blackness like I've almost never known, really. So I think even at that stage, I didn't really appreciate what was going on, but I knew it wasn't good. Up above us on the ship, they're sort of struggling to try and manually control the vessel, but they're unable to do so. It's not something they've ever really practiced, and even if they had, it's almost an impossible task. With no references and the wind and waves, the best they managed really was to turn the bow into the weather, really. But they ended up being nearly 250 meters away.
Jeez.
So no help at all. And on the bottom, I didn't really know what that or what was going on, and still I'm thinking I've just got to get myself back to the bell. So the easiest way to do that was to find the structure again and climb it, and see wherever the bell was and try and get back to it. But I, even having probably only fallen a couple of 2 or 3 meters away from that structure, I didn't really have any idea where it was. So I had a pretty big dose of bad luck, and then I had a lot of good luck from that point onwards. And one of the first was just standing up and sticking my hands out and setting off in a direction, hoping to bump into that structure. Which
must be so disorientating, because if you'd have gone the wrong way, you could have started going in what you thought was circles and actually going almost in a straight line off in a completely wrong direction.
That's so easy. I mean, even with a light on your head and a compass and a dive supervisor, you can see you on a navigation screen telling you where to go. It's still easy to get lost and go around in circles, let's say. But it was total pot luck, really. Yeah, and it's a bit like going to the loo in the middle of the night. You're fumbling your way around the bedroom. Totally no idea which way you're going. So it's very much like that. But very lucky. Sort of a couple of paces almost, and I bumped into what I assumed was the structure. It was big and metal, but even when I was touching it, I couldn't see it. Yeah. And I sort of edged my way along it, desperate not to not to let it go lest I lose it again. And eventually I found a hose. It turns out it was a pressure testing hose we'd been using. That there's like a 2-inch rubber hose that had come down from the ship previously, and that they'd had to sever on the boat as the boat moved away, because that was tied into the where we'd been working on the structure. Anyway, so that's like 100 meters long. So it had lots of weight in it lying over the top. So that was sort of secure enough for me to grab hold of it and climb to the top, back to the top of this structure. When I got to the top, fully expected to see the bell somewhere above me, and Dave or Duncan on their way back to come and help me out. But it was a kind of seminal moment really when I got to the top and looked up, and there was nothing but black water, and no sign of even a speck of light or help. That's for sure. So that was a strange moment, I think, because at that point I realised, this was suddenly going to be life threatening, and I took a couple of seconds to I didn't quite do the maths exactly, but I knew roughly that I probably had 7 or 8 minutes or something like that in my bailout, and how I'd been fumbling around on the seabed and climbing up and breathing pretty heavily, as you can imagine, panic stricken, if I'm totally honest, at that point. And I thought, well, even if Dave was right in front of me, we'd be up against the clock to get me back to the bell and put my head in and my hat off before I ran out. So it became quickly clear that my odds of getting out of it were very, very slim. And so but that had a strangely calming effect. It was weird. It wasn't like I'd given up hope, but I think the resignation that there wasn't really much I could do to save myself, because no idea where I could go or what to do. The panic almost dropped out of me at that point, and I managed to sort of regulate my breathing and curl up basically in a little ball in the middle of the structure, and keep looking up and scanning. But suddenly it just felt like I was counting down the minutes to my death at that point.
I wonder how many people have watched that and had an opinion on, I'd be all right doing that, and how few people have actually been in that sort of real life or death position, where they've had to actually take stock and go, this is what I need to do, this is what I have to do, this is what I can do. Moment. It's hard to, on reflection, to look at that and go, I know what I'd do there.
I think you'd find most people would do the same thing. You're that classic flight or fight thing. I didn't really have a lot of options. There were the choices were pretty simple and limited. I'm nobody special. Trust me. I'm pretty confident most people would do the same thing. Some people would rip their hats off in panic. When you run out of gas and things like that. But never really crossed my mind really. It's a strange one really. It's a great leveler, I think, that kind of situation. I suddenly felt, I remember sort of feeling like a lonely little boy all of a sudden, and it's almost a disbelief that you've found yourself in this situation, that you're, most of us at heart, we're still sort of 10 years old, aren't we, really?
Absolutely.
Found ourselves in a slightly older body at some point, and we're still kids and we pretend otherwise to the world, but we're still frightened of stuff, aren't we? And it very much suddenly felt like that. It felt like a lonely and strange place to be. And I remember thinking, how has it possibly happened that I am about to die in this weird and strange and dark and lonely place? It was sort of dark moments really.
Do you remember the lights going out? I don't mean literally off the top of your head. I mean, you sort of just going...
The lights are live. Yeah. I didn't know. It seemed to take a lot longer than I thought. I couldn't see we've got like a gauge for our bailouts, I couldn't see it, which in retrospect is probably a good thing, because that would have been like watching a clock really, a countdown clock. So that would have been panic inducing in itself, but it definitely seems to take a lot longer than I thought. And I was doing a lot of, calling out and apologizing to people and thinking of home and all the things you can imagine. But the last moments I often describe as being, and we'll never really know how long that took. There's no record of it really, obviously, because only my feeling of how long it was, but I couldn't tell you accurately. But eventually, I often describe it like I can remember the last moments, and like you going to bed last night, you remember getting into bed and having a cup of tea, what we do, and reading the news and having to think about what you're going to do tomorrow, and sort of starting to nod off, but you don't remember the final moments of passing into unconsciousness basically. And it was very much like that. It wasn't really, there were sort of dark minutes leading up to it, but the final moments weren't particularly unpleasant. So I'd never like to pretend that I've had an insight into death, particularly because there are people who are facing that in a very real sense every day, aren't they? Cancer patients and so on, and get given death sentences basically. But you know, if that is any kind of an insight into what death might be one day, then it was, you know, it was okay. It was okay.
Yeah. Well, that's one of the most lovely parts of the film, short of you walking back on and we all realise you didn't die. Excuse me, is that your diver, your DMT, your diver medic technician, he's sat at the side and you put your hand on his arm and go, it's okay. And he's telling his tale and he looks like this proper hard sailor, you know, roughy tufty guy that's used to, you know, dealing with shite every day. And he's almost welling up going, I can't believe my mate's telling me this, you know, and it is a nice thing to think that hopefully that when I die, that I hope it goes that way, that it's just to sort of drift off to sleep. You know, it's kind of a lovely thought to think about rather than the grimness of death or how it could be.
Absolutely, yeah, you're quite right. And I mean, people get in touch with me all the time, every day, really. And I do get a lot of people who, you know, it's people who've lost loved ones, for example, you know, in totally different circumstances, but they are sort of almost looking, they've seen that same thing that you've seen, and they sort of looking for a bit of an explanation and an answer. And at the start, I sort of felt pretty fraudulent, maybe trying to suggest that I had any insight into anything like that. But yeah, it's, you know, then you realise that you know, if you can give people a bit of comfort, you know, if that sort of calms their fears that their loved one suffers maybe in the last minute of however they died, then that can only be a good thing, right? So yeah, it's a strange one, yeah. But that one with Stu's a good example, because Stu, the diver medic, so he's exactly as you said, you know, he's a pretty hard and Inverness boy, you know, and another spoiler, but the vast majority of the footage in the film is the real thing, you know, it's hack cameras and the ROV footage is all real. But the stuff in the chambers we don't record. So that was like when you see me reaching out and grabbing his hand and telling that story bit, that's a recreation. So we had to go and do that. Stu and I went and did it in the chambers at work when we were in port one day. And when they told me what they wanted to do, I almost laughed it off. I was like, that's ridiculous, you know, okay, you know, whatever. And I was laughing and joking all the way through it, you know, taking the piss out of Stu a bit and stuff like that. Yeah. And then I watched the film, and then I same as everyone else, first time I saw Stu give that interview, and you realise what an effect it had on him, as you say, you know, he starts to break down a little bit, you know, and I felt pretty callous for having mocked him and for having made light of what was obviously quite an important moment for him, you know. And there's been a lot of that, not just making a film, but, you know, just as growing older a bit, you realise that it's actually not all about you, you know. And the bottom line is, I was just a damsel in distress in all this, and in a weird way, the three of us in the water haven't really suffered, because we almost had the euphoria of getting through it. And, you know, and I think also it's like any sort of trauma where if you're able to do something about it, which we kind of were, that's kind of cathartic in itself. But there's, you know, we have 110 people on our boat at any one time, and all of them had to watch that sort of ROV footage, you know, the sort of slightly haunted stuff, but, you know, the real thing lasts nearly 40 minutes, and a lot of them have suffered far more than I did. You know, the ROV pilot would never work with divers again, and people have had sleepless nights and things like that. So you sort of realize that you know, trauma can often affect people second hand or third hand as much, if not more, than it has those directly involved.
I think one way the conversation tends to go whenever I discussed the film when I first watched it, or recently saying, you know, to my close friends that I was interviewing you today, the conversation inevitably goes on to Dave Yuasa. And with the greatest of respect for Dave, his attitude towards the task in hand of coming retrieving you once the ROV found you. I get that coming from the military background, where there's a task, it's just got to be done. But a lot of civilians that will watch this film and have never been in any kind of scenario like that don't get it. They don't get that he is just being matter of fact, because he is just being matter of fact. That is just the job he had to do. And if he starts thinking about it, perhaps it's going to be a nightmare task for him. No, I don't know him, never met him, never spoke to him. He might just be really cold-hearted, like everyone seems to think. But I think he probably gets some unfair, not press, but unfair discussions about him, because he's just doing a job that he has to do regardless, isn't he? You're
the one who's 100% right. He gets a lot of abuse online, and it is completely and utterly unfair and unwarranted. And first of all, he's a very, very nice guy, warm-hearted, you know, father of two beautiful children. He's quite a close friend of mine, you know.
Now, he wasn't then, though, was he? He makes out he weren't.
Yeah. Now, okay. So first of all, there's there's two parts to this really. Firstly, there is quite a bit of poetic license in the film, so we're all given a role to some extent. So I play the sort of the nervous new boy, which wasn't entirely true. You know, I've been doing that for about a year and a half, that type of diving, but I've been a diver a long time before that.
Yeah.
So that Duncan plays dad, doesn't he? And that's a probably pretty accurate reflection of Duncan. He is exactly as he comes across. But Dave is cast as this sort of, almost like a psycho, almost, isn't it? a great deal of that is in the editing. So I'll give you a small example. So there's a quote, I don't know if you just mentioned in there, but people often do, where he describes coming to fetch me as coming to get an inanimate object or something like that.
Yeah.
So when we made the original 45-minute Lifeline version, he says something similar, but he phrases it very differently. He says, so I didn't want to treat going to fetch Chris like I was going to fetch my friend or going to fetch a colleague. I just wanted to treat him like an inanimate object because that made things a lot easier, which is kind of what you're saying, isn't it?
Yeah.
And of course, they sort of like that, so they made him say it again. I'm not knocking the filmmakers because they're friends of mine as well, but there's that's edited down to whatever it is. I just just treat it like an inanimate object and whatever. So he is definitely edited to seem far worse than he is. He has got a touch of that about him in terms of he is matter of fact. That makes also, as you astutely pointed out, that makes him extremely good at what he does. It's also exactly what I needed in the water with me that night. What I didn't want is somebody panicking and flapping, and he just treated it. You imagine going to fetch a dead body. If you've been involved in the military, you may have experience or something like that. It's not it can't ever be a pleasant thing to do, and I think you probably need to disassociate yourself from something like that as well. So there's all that. But probably the most important thing is that Dave, people always are very kind. They call me and they want to speak to me, partly because I'm at the center of it. But the truth is, I didn't do anything in all this, really. I just lay there and fall unconscious and get rescued. Dave
just had a snooze, mate, for half an hour, didn't you? That was it. Yeah,
just sort of cut a bell run short by being lazy, really. Dave is sort of the real hero in all this, and he is somebody who doesn't seek publicity, or he won't read, and I very much doubt he reads any of that line. He couldn't care less. But he's definitely done a massive. When I first saw a first draft of the film, that's the only thing that really bothered me, was I felt he was treated unfairly, and so it goes. That's how he sort of the response he gets online. But like the thing he says, people know him as a Vulcan on board, but I don't know why he said that, because that's not true. Everybody likes Dave. He's nice, just quiet and matter of fact, doesn't really suffer fools very much, but he's a very nice, intelligent, warm-hearted guy. He just so he's harshly done by. So Dave's a champ. I love him.
I suppose though, it makes the film what it is, doesn't it? It's more of a story, by having the good guy, the bad guy, if that, for want of a better phrase, it's got more appeal, hasn't it, that way, and more discussion topics afterwards.
Yeah, you kind of realise that later, that there has to be a bit of poetic license in a little bit. It's mostly fairly accurate, but there's definitely little bits you think, we should have done that slightly differently or whatever, but you realise they know what they're doing, and they've made a film that's turned out to be quite popular. So it's understandable, but I still feel Dave maybe gets the rough end of the stick and all that. But as I said, he doesn't care. His only concern, we've talked a lot about it since, and his only concern ever was coming across as seeming professional. Not being made a fool of, and he wasn't. So
no, I agree there. So obviously they got you back to the bell. That's clear as day now. We didn't see that till a good few minutes later when you did that little 5-minute walk on, which was ace. I've got to rip you though, because when you sat down, they started putting makeup on your face, and I thought you just look so uncomfortable when they start putting a bit of foundation on. How was that for you?
Well, it's like you. It's not really part of my day job. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
The whole filmmaking thing was, it was great. It was good. We sort of all went. We kind of all did it as a favour almost, because we liked Richard, who we met through the first film.
Yeah.
We've all been conscious not to glamorise it. We don't want to glamorise something that, like I said, got to patronise my colleagues or anything like that by making myself out to be something I'm not. But fundamentally, it was good fun. It was good. It was a great experience. It's one of the very many positive things that came out of the accident was the making of the film, and it was it's a world we're all sort of curious about, isn't it? Hollywood filmmaking or whatever, so it was nice to be involved. But you're definitely a little bit outside your comfort zone, and but it was okay. Enjoyed it.
I was shocked. Was it like the next day that you went diving again? Were you in within a couple of days or something, weren't you?
That's 3 weeks. 3 weeks later, yeah, it was. Yeah, the HSE shut us down. We came into port and there was an investigation, and they had to sort of determine the root cause of the problem and obviously rectify it so they wouldn't happen again and test the vessel again. But yeah, they gave us the option to go back to be the first to go back, basically. So we made a decision as a team of three, that we all stuck our hands up, and we didn't really think too much about it, to be honest, which I promise you is not a decision made out of bravery. It was just a case of, it's kind of our jobs, really, and I don't know how to do anything else. And my worry at the time was, it just cost me my career. Are they going to let me carry on? So, given even a glint of a chance to go back, I stuck my hand up. That alongside the fact that you do feel slightly disassociated from what happened, and then also the fact that it was an incredibly unlikely accident, it was something almost
couldn't even forecast it happening, could you?
Really, basically, I mean, people always say, "Oh, you've got to prepare for the impossible," but you can't really, nobody really anticipated anything like that ever happening. So, yeah, and yet we came through it, and we sort of had that euphoria. So, yeah, it was fine. But the also other thing is that I was a lot younger, in the infancy of my career. If that were to happen to me today, I don't know if I would be quite so keen to go back. I've got young children and stuff now, and it might be the sort of the straw that broke the camel's back these days. But yeah, when we did, it was fine. A few laughs and a few jokes, a lot of piss taken, as you can imagine. How people get through these things, and but as soon as we were in the water and working and concentrating, it's quite quickly forgotten, really. Yeah.
Has anyone done like any investigation of how you survived? Because obviously was it over 40? I don't think I've wrote it down. How long were you without umbilical? Was it about 40 minutes?
Well, we don't know how long the gas would have lasted. Gas probably lasted, let's say it's 9 minutes, so that would mean about 31 minutes with nothing to breathe. Because
you touch on it in the film, don't you, about like the temperature and the partial pressure of O2 that the residual O2 that would have been saturated within you. But has anyone like really scientifically looked into it?
There's a couple of not really. There's a Dutch university who are looking into it now, and I'm going to speak to them in September, I think, and see what they've come up with. But yeah, I mean, I've been down and spoke at the Royal Medical Society in London, and I've been to hyperbaric conferences and stuff, and discussed it with doctors and physicians and all sorts. I've never really had a very, very good answer, I suppose. What they sort of all agree on is that the sort of the margins must have been incredibly small between. It's not just the survival is one thing, isn't it, but it's the survival with no brain damage. Well, at least no one's been brave enough to tell me otherwise, anyway. But it's,
you're on here, mate, so you must be goosed.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, it's hard to know, but yeah, I think my first thought was, it's the cold water has saved me. I was hypothermic, very, very quickly, and bright blue when I came back to the bed and stuff, and my core temperature was still down at something like, I want to say 35 and a half or something like that, or 36 maybe. Very, very low anyway, a good hour and a half after I'd got out of the water. So that definitely had to be a factor. You hear stories of kids falling through ice, don't you, and surviving for crazy periods, and people used to use that, I still use that in the hospitals quite a lot, cool the blood and the body to operate on people. But yeah, the other, I think, in hindsight, they're probably the biggest contributing survival factor was the high partial pressure of O2. So that night we were breathing, I think we had 7% online. If you want to do the physics, 7% online
times 10
to our hat, and then 10% in the bailout. Yeah. 10% in the bailout. But 10% is quite a lot higher than 7. So that was right at the top end of our sort of PPO2 margins.
What pressure do you normally work at there? Because like me, I'm a rebreather, I'll be at 1.3. So that, what are you on there, about 0.7?
Partial pressure of 1.3.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, when we're working in the water, no, lower than that, it's up to 0.8, so 0.4, right. 0.6 to 0.8 in the water, yeah. 4 to 0.8 in the bell, that's right.
But I suppose you don't have nitrogen in your mix though, do you? So you wouldn't need to have the higher PPO2, or PO2, sorry, because you're not trying to counteract the narcotic effects, are you? Yeah,
that's absolutely right, yeah. So it's kept low because we're in there a long time, so to avoid oxygen toxicity and stuff like that. It needs to be low. That's the biggest fear, is always that. The bailout, well, I never what's the PPO2 in the bailout, but it would have been, so 10%, yeah, probably, I think our limit now is 1.4, I want to say, is the limit in the bailout. That's been lowered. I think on the night maybe it's nearer 1.8 or even a bit higher, which I think was a saving factor, you know. But when you see the film, that sort of footage of me lying on the top, you can sort of see me twitching almost, you know, and I'm definitely unconscious at that point. So as a doctor in his wisdom has decided that was O2 toxicity, and therefore he's now reduced the maximum ppO2 we're allowed in our bailouts, you know, which it seems counterintuitive, really. I would have thought, I don't think it is O2 toxicity. I don't think that was possible for that duration of a higher, you know, 9 minutes of that O2. I can't see it. And I think it's more likely a carbon dioxide thing, or a, you know, just a bit of twitching, really. And the current as well, you know. Anyway, in his wisdom, he's lowered it, which I don't particularly think is a good thing, but there we go. I'm not an expert. But that ultimately, I think that's what it was. Yes, every, you know, your tissues are saturated with oxygen of very high partial pressure, and that just allowed everything to keep functioning and stay alive, basically, you know, the individual cells to stay alive. You know, the brain, as I'm sure you know, is the first to go in that situation from anoxia, you know, or you know, hypoxia, and to have not suffered at all just seems miraculous, really.
Very. So were you like interested in diving before you got into this job then? Were you a scuba diver or anything like that?
No, I wasn't. I'm ashamed to say I wasn't. I was feeling a bit embarrassed about that when people asked me. Dave and Duncan were. So Dave and Duncan were both people who Dave used to teach scuba out in Thailand and places like that.
Yeah.
Duncan's just been a diving buff all his life. You know, he used to watch, I think he says in the film, doesn't he? Watches. He used to watch Jacques Cousteau, and you know, he used to dive as a kid out in all over the world and worked out in Hong Kong and stuff. So yeah, they've both found a way to make their passion their vocation, if you like. But that wasn't the case for me at all. No, I fell into it, really. I had a summer job. I was at a point in my life when I was about 20, just unsure of what to do with my future, really. And you know, I got given a mate gave me a job working on the back deck of a DSV, a dive support vessel, just like, you know, to earn a bit of money, really. So I used to do sort of the rigging up on the deck and send the gear down to the divers, and you know, wash the wetsuits and all that kind of rubbish, and used to see them working, and thought, that's for me. And that was, you know, it was a big moment in my life, was realizing what I wanted to do, and you know, gave me the drive to sort of see it through, really. So but unfortunately, I wish there was a more romantic backstory, but there isn't.
Because you don't sound that you're from Aberdeen.
Sorry,
say again. What did you say?
I think they used to turn up and flash your cars at me. I think that was probably the biggest driving force. Anyway, I was going to say, because you sound like you're from like the sort of southeast of England. You don't sound like you're from Aberdeen at all. No, not at all. No, I was born in Edinburgh, but I grew up in Cambridge. I grew up in Cambridge. I moved to Cambridge about 3 years, something like that. So that's where my upbringing was. No, I live in Scotland now, just because my wife's Scottish. So she's a Gaelic teacher, and there's not much cool for that in Cambridge. Have you managed to pick any of that up? The Gaelic, you mean? Yeah. Very little. Yeah, my daughter speaks, so it's like a little code between them that I'm not privy to. Yeah. Awesome. I can tell you a word for blue and red. I'm afraid I'm not much more than that. I'm embarrassed. That's nuts. So, what about diving now then? Are you predominantly staying in the North Sea, or do you get around the world with the company you work for? No, I'm so I worked as an air diver for years. You know, that's what you do. That's your path into saturation diving. You work as an air diver. So I used to do that all over the world. But no, saturation diving, I've only ever done in the North Sea. And the boat I work on is pretty much a fixed abode down there at the moment. So yeah, it's possible we might change. As long as I'm on there, I think we'll mostly be in the North Sea. There's talk of us going over to Trinidad and the Middle East during this winter, actually. But whether that comes to pass or not. So you're still on Topaz, are you? Yeah, still working there now. Yeah. I've actually literally I think anyway, stopped diving. So literally last trip, I've just got back a week ago, and I've started doing my dive supervisor training. So, you know, didn't have to get wet for once, which was a pleasure, to be honest. Yeah. So what level? Because I'm HSE Part 4, so that's like the professional scuba for like media and scientific and that. So what level are you at now? I think in terms of scuba, I'll be the same as you. Yeah, I've got a professional. I don't even know, professional scuba qualification. Yeah. Part 4, and then you take your air diving ticket, which is I think that's Part 3, isn't it? So you're still on a helmet, but surface supplied. Surface supplied. Then there's like an offshore top up or something like that. Right. That's just to use the hot water suits. Yeah, and then you do that, and then you have to get so many hours and so many years of experience, and then you can do your saturation course. But I don't have any kind of paddy or anything like that. So I think literally, if I turn up on holiday to rent a set of tanks, they probably say no. So much.
Have you seen this film?
I am. But yeah, I don't do much. I've got, occasionally I'll go out and get scallops and stuff around. I live in the west of Scotland, so I do a bit of scallop diving. But yeah, I don't really do much.
No.
Probably now I'm going to start supervising. It's something I might start doing a bit more. Actually, yeah, is diving at home. Really, yeah.
Is that a progression because you've perhaps maxed out with your age, or you've done enough of that kind of diving now, so you're moving into the supervisory role? Is that why you're going that way?
Everything really. No, I definitely not maxed out the age. I mean, it's an older man's game, the saturation diving generally.
Is it?
I would still I'm not probably middle aged in that if you like. Duncan, for example, he's must be knocking towards 60, and he's still diving, and still on the Topaz as well. And I did a last dive with a colleague who was 64, I think, and still going strong as long as you're fit and able. A lot of the work's on the bottom, so you're not having to fin around too much, but occasionally you'll need to. So you need a level of fitness, but you don't need to be a superhuman or anything.
No.
It's more about those older guys anyway, tend to box clever and be far more efficient than the majority of us. So it's partly that you've got to if you want to sort of go in that direction and I suppose move up the ladder a bit, and you need to take a decision at some point to stop diving, because it takes a long time to be a dive supervisor and go on from there, really. So there's also part of me that had enough of living in the chambers. It's not so much the diving, it's the living in the chamber, the close confines of the chambers. So if you said to me I had to keep doing it for another 10 years, I'd be fine. I don't hate it or anything, but last trip I was watching the lads go in, for 28 days in there, and I wasn't envious of them, put it that way.
Yeah. So in trying to obviously find guests for this podcast, I come across you quite a while ago on the film that the Last Breath. So in trying to find you, I come across your website. It looks like you do quite a bit of work on dry land now. Do you want to talk about that a bit?
Yeah, it's more. I think it's more. I wouldn't say work is probably a bit strong. It's moonlight. I moonlight as a bit of a public speaker these days. It doesn't really fit in that well with my work because it's hard to commit to stuff. But certainly during COVID, it's been great. I've done a lot of stuff online and things. But I've got a little website. It's chrislemons.co.uk, and it sort of spawned really when people came to me. People would come to me and ask me to go and talk about what had happened, and those sort of exponentially got bigger. Really, I started getting invited. Went out to Canada and been invited to Australia and stuff like that. And
wow,
just quite enjoy it, really. That's something I quite enjoy doing, and it just gives me a little bit of pocket money when I'm at home as well, which is nice. So it's just sometimes it's just nice to go and talk to people, but it's also sometimes nice to pass on the messages, the things we learned, about the safety culture and all that sort of thing to a willing audience, really. So it's a bit of fun, really. But
does it tend to just be industry that employs you, or is it like civilian groups?
Initially it was industry, so oil companies sometimes, lots of BP and Shell and stuff like that, and Nixon and that sort of big oil companies. But suddenly it's flooded into all sorts. The sort of leadership conferences, that kind of thing, which is not really my natural hunting ground, but it's they seem to quite enjoy it, and it does translate quite well. It's a sort of a story that you can weave in all sorts of messages, if you like, into it. So I do quite a bit of that, and then a wide range. I did a couple of days ago. I did a pharmaceutical company, for example, and so it's a sort of in schools sometimes even also a wide spectrum.
Is that something that came naturally to you though, to talk in public? Because I can talk and the iron legs off a donkey over a brew between dives or like on here now. I find it quite easy, but when I stand up in front of an audience, I'm not comfortable there. That's not my place at being at home. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I know what you mean, exactly. Yeah, I mean, I'm okay, but certainly to start with, I'd get very, very nervous, definitely. And then I got invited out to Canada to this big thing, and it was all, it was a proper big production with lights and a big audience and screens, and suddenly I wasn't as confident as I thought I was. But it's amazing. It's just like anything else in life, isn't it? You do it a few times, and you suddenly
it becomes easier and natural.
It's easier, yeah, it does. And especially this story now, I haven't done it so much. It comes to me quite naturally, telling the stories and answering questions on it as well. So it's it's okay. But yeah, I still get sweaty palms definitely every time I do it. It's not a comfortable and natural place to be, is it?
No, I don't know how you do it. I mean, I don't ever envisage me needing to or wanting to, or people wanting to have me in front of people.
Oh,
But
neither did I. So there you go. Yeah. You never know.
well, I'm glad you lived to tell the tale, mate, and I'm glad you wanted to come on here. I really appreciate it. No doubt my audience, however small that might be, will appreciate it too.
Real pleasure. Yeah, thanks for inviting me. And I've enjoyed it. It's nice
right,
to talk
mate.
a bit more passionate about diving as well. So it's great.
Very much so, yeah. Well, I'm glad you, like I said, I'm glad you're here. Glad you told the tale, and it was an awesome film, wasn't it? So, no doubt, yeah, it'll keep being watched by loads of people. Wish you every success, mate, in your public speaking and your dive supervisor's role. Not envious at all, because I don't want to do either.
Oh, it's it's a plate spinning nightmare, dive supervising offshore. Yeah, but yeah, good. I'll get my head around it eventually, I hope. But yeah, thank you. Thanks. I'm glad you enjoyed the film, and thank you very much indeed for having me.
No worries. Have a good weekend, mate. Take it easy. Bye-bye. See you.
Bye.
Thanks very much to this week's guest for sharing their stories and interesting tales about the underwater world. I hope you enjoyed listening to it as much as I did recording it. For more information on this episode, take a look at the description below. And don't forget to subscribe to the podcast if you haven't already, and follow us on Instagram for the latest news. Thanks again to Northern Diver International and those of you who have supported me through Patreon. Take care, and I'll see you on YouTube.